My name is Patty Bernard, and I'm a member of the Nevada Women's History Project. Today is Thursday, November 9th, 2019. And this interview is through the generosity of the John Ben Snow Grant. Today we are interviewing Ruth Hilts of Reno, Nevada, and a local artist. Thank you so much for interviewing with us, Ruth. We appreciate the honor of interviewing you as a long established artist in Reno, Nevada. Can you talk a little bit about your early life, your parents, where you were born,
Yes,
when you were born?
I can do that. At the time I was born, in 1923, my parents did live in Reno, but because Dr. C.W. West took all of his mothers-to-be at a lying-in hospital in Sparks. So on my birth certificate it says Sparks, Nevada, but my family was from Reno. My mother can trace her lineage all the way back to Robert Keyes, K-E-Y-E-S, 1630 in Watertown, Massachusetts. My dad was a first-generation American. His mother was French. Her name was Rosalie. That's one of my middle names. She was French. She married a Gonzales named Raphael. They were married in Europe and had a couple of children. The oldest one was Joseph, I believe. It was a slow boat from Europe in 1880. There was what would you call it, an illness that swept through the boat. She arrived in New York, a widow, with one son named Joseph, expecting my father. This is 1881. He was born in Brooklyn, 1881, and because his mother could have taught him French and Spanish, he said, "Talk American." I don't want to hear anything but American. So anyway, World War I came along, and he was in France. I don't know whether he was driving a tank or what he was doing, and my mother was a single person. She had been born in Vermont, and a well-established, long family in New England. She was working in Boston, and she saw all the boys going to Europe. She wanted to go too. So the Red Cross was already, couldn't take any more volunteers. The Red Cross, and anyway, there were 3 organizations that took volunteers to go to France. Some could drive, some my mother could not drive, but they did other things. My mother became a donut dolly. She stood in the mud, in the cold, in Brest, France. And the boys would get out of the trenches, and they would have coffee and donuts and coffee and donuts. That was her 11 months in France. So she came back to the United States and landed in New York. My dad had come back from France and had landed in New York. Evidently, he was a very personable Billy. Billy. They fell in love, and they thought, wouldn't it be fun to go to California? To California. They never made it as far as California. Thank goodness they stopped in Reno. There was no other family in Reno with a Spanish name at that time in 1923. No Spanish names at all. There was some Italian names, but not Spanish. And so my mother's neighbor who worked for the phone company said she called her Mrs. Gonzales. And my mother said, it's pronounced Gonzales. And her neighbor said, I'm sorry, it's spelled Gonzales in the phone book, and that's all I know. Anyway, now, kindergarten,
Well, let's go back. What was your mother's name?
my mother's name was Nellie. Actually, it was Nellie Eliza DeGouche. And she was a direct descendant of Robert Keyes, Keyes, who landed in Watertown, Massachusetts in 1630. So
Right.
I've got the
Right.
record.
I know that Gonzales here is very common, and
Now,
now is very common.
but it was not then.
And it is Mexican, obviously, from Spain, but
Yes, he
your
was from
grandfather was from Spain.
That's right.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit about your early schooling?
Well, when I got to be 5 years old, my mother, now can I talk about the Semenza family first? The first place I remember living up until the time I was 3 or 4 years old was at the Semenza home. It's a 2-story house on Vine Street. The lower level was a rental. We rented that for several years. The upstairs was the Semenza family, and that's a very well-known family. See if I can remember all of them. Lawrence became a public accountant, has his own business. Edwin, Reno Little Theater. The girls, Nevada, was a journalist who traveled in the Orient, and I remember seeing her mother's beautiful chests from China that her daughter had sent back to her. That was Nevada, I think. Grace, I don't know what she did. Rena was a singer. She had the most glorious voice. But this was during the Depression. She was a school teacher. She taught kindergarten, and I was a student of hers in kindergarten. And then there was Evelyn, the youngest one. She was a teacher and a writer. Now that was quite a wonderful family. The mother was an elegant lady, well-educated. The father, I think the kids were they were teased because their daddy, the senior Semenza, had the contract for the garbage collection in Reno. And so naturally the kids in school, they all graduated from the University of Nevada with honors, all of them. They were a wonderful family, and I do remember visiting the grandma. That's my mother always called her Grandma Semenza, so that's what I thought she was. I didn't have a grandmother out here, but I had Grandma Semenza. And she was a beautiful person with a glorious voice.
That would be her right here.
Yes, right there. And I remember when they did, before they got the Reno Little Theater building, they used to have their programs at what we called the State Building. No longer exists, of course. But I remember the Mikado, and Rena sang Poor Butterfly. And that's a long time ago, but I remember it so well. Okay. Now, what else would you like to know?
You were in this picture,
I am.
and if I can point it out, I think you are right here.
The one that looks kind of shy.
Right.
You know why? My eyes
Oh,
were
no.
even then very sensitive to light.
Right. She's in the plaid
I made that
apron.
apron myself in kindergarten. Okay, now, upstairs, that Babcock Kindergarten on the corner of 5th and West. Upstairs was the first grade. Miss McCormick taught first grade. And from there, I went from second grade through sixth at Mary S. Doughton School. None of the schools that I went to are still existing. They're all gone. Babcock Kindergarten, Mary S. Doughton Elementary, Northside Junior High, and Reno High School on the corner of 4th and West. What else would you like to know? Now,
You graduated at what year?
1941.
1941, so you are into the war. What did you do in the war years, and when did you meet your husband?
Well, I wanted to go to the university, but there was no art department. And I knew I was an artist. I had been working my own self as an artist as a youngster. So I didn't go to the university then. I got married. My boyfriend, Bob Hilts, Robert N. Hilts Sr., and he was working for Douglas Aircraft. And so I joined him and lived in, it was close to Santa Monica, West Los Angeles, almost to Santa Monica. And because he was working, I signed up to go to the junior college in Santa Monica to take some art classes. Then he finally was able to get out of the clutches of Douglas Aircraft so he could be a flyboy and went to the Air Force, Army Air Force. So I came back to Reno and I had my first child, Robbie, Robert Norton Hilts Jr. in 1944. When Robbie got to be about 4 years old, I read in the newspaper that Craig Shepard had come to Reno and there was going to be an art department. So I gathered up my courage and some work that I had done and went to visit and to meet Mr. Shepard. He took one look at the things I brought and said, "Oh my God, Ruth, come whenever you can, get a babysitter, come." And I did. I audited classes there I audited classes in the art department. He said, "Don't bother to register, just come when you can." So I did. I took drawing and watercolor painting and oil painting and whatever when I could to pay for my work. He didn't have a secretary, but I could type. So I typed whatever he needed to be done in the art department. That was down in the temporary buildings. They were buildings that had been brought to the university and set up in what we called Skunk Hollow. The English department and the art department were in those temporary buildings that came off of Stead Air Force Base. That was the art department.
And that was north of the gymnasium, is that correct?
No. Here's campus, and you go down over the ditch, and here's the engineering building, the big engineering building, and in that valley, we call it Skunk Hollow.
Right.
The English department and the art department had those little...
Quonset huts.
They were what?
Quonset huts.
Well, they weren't Quonset. They were square with roofs, but they were temporary buildings from Stead Air Force Base. Okay, so I felt that I did whatever I could to pay for my art education at that point. I typed all the letters he needed typing. I answered the phone when he needed that done. And after a few years, I thought, well, both kids are, by that time, Deirdre, my daughter, was born and in school. So I said, now I'm going to register. So I did. I registered at the university, and I took whatever art classes I had not had as an auditor, and English classes, and I got to know the English professors very well. Gorell, Laird, Hume, all of them. So when the time came to declare a major in my junior year, I said English. Oh, Craig was so angry because I was an A student. Anyway, I finally graduated, in 1961, 62. That was my graduation. I was 39. The kids I went to school with, the regular kids out of high school, they were 17 when we entered, and I was over 30. And when we graduated, one of the little gals who was an English major with me said, Ruth, when we started, we thought you were kind of old, and now we're all the same age. I hadn't aged a lot. Now, what else would you like to know?
You talk about a group of you going up to Virginia City with Craig Shepard and Gus Bundy.
And his wife, Yo, and Gus Bundy, Tina's daddy. And I think there was a young man who was a really advanced student, but I don't remember what his name was, and me. And we would drive up once a week, and there was a professional model living in Virginia City at the time. And we would draw from the nude model, which you could not do at the university. There was no facilities for drawing from the nude model. But up there we could do it, and we did. Once a week for many weeks, I think 2 or 3 years. And then what happened?
What years would this be around?
Oh, let's see. In the 60s, 70s, because I graduated in 1961. I did I did take some advanced classes in English, but I did not want to stay for the master's. I didn't want to be a school teacher. I wanted to be an artist. So anyway, after that, my friend, we went to school together, Mary Ellen Glass. She had started the oral history project. And she knew that I knew English. She knew that I knew how to spell. She knew I knew how to be an editor. She said, Ruth, I've got enough money to pay for a half-time interviewer editor. How about it? I said, good, I'll do that. And as long as the money lasted, the grant money, I was with her for 2.5, 3 years. And then the grant money went out. Everybody thought, oh dear, you've lost your job. I was tickled to death because I could go back to the studio and start painting again. So I did.
Do you remember some of the people that you interviewed?
Oh, I should, because it was 2 or 3 years worth of interviewing. I should have made a list, but I don't remember. Honey, this is ancient history.
Well, let's go on to your art.
Okay.
So you went to the university and acquired some more classes, but you were painting all of that time, is that correct?
Well, I didn't go back to the art department. I went out on my own.
Right.
Both of my kids were grown up. There was a third bedroom in the house that was perfectly good for a studio. So I set up my own studio and I worked there. And Marge Means, who was very active in the Artist Co-op, Ruth, we want you to be a member. And I said, well, we shall see. I presented some of my work, and Lyle Ball was the big daddy at that time. He approved. I was a member of the Artists Co-op between 1977 and 1987. That's 10 years. During that time, I was the president 1 year. We did well. Lyle Ball and Esther had retired and went somewhere. They thought the co-op would die without them. It didn't. It blossomed.
Were you in the co-op at the time when they purchased the building that they are
that
in
was
now?
before my time.
That was before.
It was before. It was a well-established little building. It was, you know about the history of the building, I'm sure.
Well, I do, but maybe you might want to tell us a little
It
bit.
had been a French hand laundry. I'm trying to think of the name of the family, the French family who had that. It was a French hand laundry. I should have written it down.
It's okay.
They were very happy. I mean, the city of Reno wanted to get rid of that old building. It was vacant. And they thought, well, we'll get rid of that. Well, the artists went in and said, we will refurbish it. We will establish an art gallery there for showing and selling. And the city council thought, oh, well, a bunch of artists. We'll give them 6 months. Well, you know, it is still thriving. It is a wonderful building group, changed over the years. People died. New ones came in. It is still a thriving little store called the Artists Co-op of Reno.
At the time that they made the co-op, were there any other areas where artists could show their work
No.
other than the Nevada Art Gallery?
Nothing. There was nothing for artists to show and sell. Peter Stremmel had started out, but he was interested, what's her name?
Turkey.
Turkey. Peter and Turkey were interested in well-known, nationally known artists. So there was nothing for locals to show until the Artists Co-op started, and it thrived. As you know, it thrived over the years.
Were you a member of the Nevada Art Gallery at any time?
Which turned into the museum.
Yes.
Oh, from my beginning, I don't know when it was the little white house on Ralston Street that had been Mr. Cutt's house. And his friend,
Dr. Church?
Dr. Church. And I remember Dr. Church very well because he was a member of the First Baptist Church where I went to Sunday school. Mr. Kurtz and Dr. Church would rock up Ralston Street. I'm not Ralston, Maple Street. Here's the Mr. Cutt's house on Ralston Street. Here's Maple Street that comes directly from that. It was called Professor's Row because there was Professor Murgotten and Professor Kogel and Dr. Hartman. I mean, it was Professor's Row. It was a beautiful street. Interstate 80 came through and wiped that whole area out, and it broke my heart. But anyway, Dr. Church would come by with Mr. Cutts on his way down Maple Street to Chestnut, and we lived on the corner there in 243 Maple Street in the little red house, little red brick house. And then they would walk up over the ore ditch and up to University Terrace and go to school. But anyway, every morning when they came by, Mother wanted us to stay inside the fence. She was a very protective mother. Dr. Church would stop by and say, "Good morning, little girls. What are you going to do today?" And then he would walk up to go to the university. I remember him so well. He went to Greenland.
When did you join the art gallery? The Reno.
Oh, let's see. When was it?
Did you join
I
before?
did a show there of, I thought, very primitive work, but it was probably in the early 70s. And I've kept my membership going all those years.
But you never were in the management?
Oh, no. I just simply was a member. I paid my dues.
Right.
And when they wanted me to show some work, I did. When they wanted me to sit with other shows, I did. It was a very, how would you say it? It was not amateurish. It was just a bunch of friends. We didn't get paid for anything. When they acquired the Hawkins house up on
Court Street.
Court Street, I had my first show at that building. I mean, a good a good show.
Right.
Marcia Groden was the director at that time. What else do you want to know?
Well, we've talked about your art a little bit, and we know that you were interested in art at an early age.
Oh, yeah.
But when did you really
When did
discover?
I know?
Yes.
I think I was in 5th grade. I was in 5th grade, and the kids loved to have me draw little pictures for them and paper dolls for the girls. My 5th grade teacher was named Isabel Moe. She realized that I had talent, and when it came time to draw a picture for a certain story that was being done in geography or history, she had me do that. That was good. My student teacher at that time, with Miss Moe, was Bud Beasley. He was the most personable, outgoing person. He was an older student teacher, but I kept going home and saying, "Mr. Beasley said this, Mr. Beasley said that." My mother said, "Mr. Beasley." Anyway, one day we met on the street, and I introduced my mother to Mr. Beasley, and after he went away, she looked at me and she said, "Well, that was your Mr. Beasley. The ugliest man I ever met." I was crushed. She got to know him later and discovered what a wonderful person he was. But I mean, the first impression was very different.
And we know Bud Beasley then went on to become a well-known Washoe County educator. And
Oh, yes, indeed. And there's a school built for his name in Sparks. After I moved to this retirement home where I'm living now, they do have little bus trips now and again. And one time they took the bus up into a part of Sparks that I didn't even know existed, and there was Bud Beasley's school.
That's right.
I was so proud.
What other art organizations were you in? Were you a Latimer?
No. There were a lot of ladies that I knew in Latimer, but they were in my mother's generation. And I thought, no, they thought I should join, but I thought, no, I'd rather paint. So I painted instead of going to meetings. I knew them. I knew Minerva Pierce, I think, lived across the street from us when we lived on Maple Street. I knew her. Who else?
When did you?
Dolores Samuels Young. I knew her. Anyway, I knew the ladies in the Latimer Club, and I knew them well, but I didn't go to meetings. I just painted.
You went out on your own. What mediums did you use in your art?
To begin with, it was charcoal, of course, and black India ink. Then I got watercolor, acrylics, oils. What's the other one? Do you want to know about this? This is the largest watercolor I ever did. And that was Coffery Armstrong wanted a large watercolor when they had the 8th floor in that building on the corner of Liberty and Virginia. Coffery Armstrong had the whole 8th floor, and so they had this great big reception room, and they wanted a watercolor, not oil, watercolor to go across that whole wall. Leroy Bergstrom was one of the officers then, and his wife, Pat, wonderful artist who was a good friend of mine. I said, Pat, there's no watercolor paper that big. She said, oh, yes, there is. Oh, yes, there is. I know where to send for it, and I will send for it, and you can have it, and you're going to do it. In order to make that painting, my husband was with the Department of Wildlife. He was out of town the whole month of May, always. In the living room, I pushed all the furniture back and laid a great big sheet of plywood, 4x8 plywood, on the floor. That was my drawing board. I put a great big unrolled a great big piece of watercolor paper the same size and held it down with bricks that I had very carefully covered with white cotton. So it was held down all the way around so it wouldn't roll. And then I got down on my hands and knees and I started to paint. And it took me about 3 weeks. But what they wanted was a canyon. That's what it is. Mm-hmm. It's a canyon with the mountains and the colors that you see in Valley of Fire and so forth. That was the largest watercolor I ever made.
Do you remember how large it was?
Well, the frame was 4 feet by 8 feet, so it was pretty good size.
And what were some of the other, you obviously painted small pictures. Did you also do other commercial art?
No.
That was your largest commission?
That was the largest painting, yes. The oils that I've done were mostly standard, 18 by 24 and so forth and so on. But maybe you'd like to know about this. One of the shows that I had, and I'm kind of trying to remember what year it was. The paintings were all done with Nevada earth. Bob and he had a pickup truck, and whenever he wasn't working, we traveled all around Nevada. Every time I saw colored earth, I'd say, stop. I had a can and a shovel, and I would take a sample of every color that I could find. Actually, I had more than that, because after I did this schematic, that was for a show. How many pieces? 1, 2, 3, 4. There's about 20 there. I had 26 colors finally after I did this. What I did when we went up to Virginia City, I would see red earth. Bob, stop right now. I want that. And then there was orange up at Virginia City, and yellow. All these wonderful ore colors. I would take home the dirt that I had found. I had a mortar and pestle. I ground them and ground them and ground them, and then I would sieve them through fabric until they were very fine, fine enough to work with water and make watercolor.
Wow.
I got pretty famous for that.
I wished I would have known you then.
I wish I had known you too, because I had shows at River Gallery with Douglas. Jan Douglas had River Gallery. She did wonderful shows for me. After I graduated from the co-op in '87, I went out on my own, and I had many shows. All of these shows are after I graduated from the co-op.
Oh my goodness.
All of these shows were after I said graduated from the co-op.
So you start actually your exhibits, selected exhibits in 2005 was Travels in Nevada. Were you then using this palette at the time?
Some of them I did. Some of them are watercolor. Some of them are this. I can't remember which is which on my...
Were these colors then, were you able to reproduce them in oils also, or?
I didn't bother with oil. I just went with the water medium because it's faster.
So is that your preferred medium?
It
water?
is truly, because it's fast and it dries quickly, whereas oils you have to wait until they dry. Watercolor in Nevada dries fast.
Yes, it does. You also, I remember going to your apartment, you also sculpt, or you sculpted.
Yeah, I did. Yes, when I went back as an elder student to the university, I did take a course in sculpture. I built up a lot of them with clay and tore them down, of course. But that one piece, Craig and Ed Yates at that time, they both said, that's good enough to keep. So why don't you prepare it for the kill? In other words, it has to be cleaned out inside so that the walls are only about that thick. Very carefully cleaned out the whole inside, took the top off, and they said, now if it gets through the kiln and doesn't break, we'll show you how to glaze it. So I did. After they had put it into the kiln and it came out, no cracks. Then they said, okay, now you can pick out what color you want or what you want for a glaze, and we'll show you how to do that. So I glazed it. That was fine. So then they said, now you've got to have some kind of a base for it. So they presented me with a hunk of mahogany and said, now shape it and get it just so it will be a good base for that head. I did. My husband, bless his heart, drilled a hole through the wood into the head. Mm-hmm. And there it is. I can't remember what, I think on the bottom of it might have a date, but I don't remember for sure. But anyway, that's the only piece of sculpture that I ever kept.
But did you do some professionally? Did you sell any sculptures or any?
No, I didn't do
three-dimensional art.
I just painted. That's what I could do in my home studio. My home studio. And everything I had in that room has now, most of it has been taken up to special collections. Donnie Curtis at Special Collections. She said, everything you can bring up that you have in your studio, because my daughter wanted, I was over 90. My daughter said, you should not be living alone. I'm worried about you. I think you should be in not assisted living, it's in a retirement hotel. So when they were clearing out my studio, my grandson Christopher, who is talented, if he didn't have to work, he could be an artist, but he took my drawing table and my lamps and things, but everything else went up to the university. And Donnie got Jim McCormick to come. He was retired by then. He went up and went through all of this stuff, and he said, my God, she was a child prodigy, wasn't she? That's what he told me. I said, well, I never thought about it one way or the other. After 5th grade, I always was drawing and painting, pretty much abstract. But this is realism, and so is that.
Ruth, let's talk about the lovely card that you sent me. It's of the Gold Hill Hotel in Virginia City, and it's gorgeous. Does it have a story?
Jack Bacon wanted something for their Christmas card, and I didn't know, I mean, what do you do for a Christmas card?
And
so I had Bob take me up to Gold Hill. Over the hill, up to Virginia City, over the hill to Gold Hill. And I said, Park, I think I want to take some pictures, some snapshots of that wonderful old hotel. And I painted it, actually, because Jack Bacon wanted a painting for his Christmas card. So that's the story.
And what happened to the original painting?
Well, the young couple who had been married there saw the painting in frame up, Jack Bacon's place, and he said, we were married there, I want that painting. He paid for it and took it. And I happen to know the girl who was married there. Anyway.
So how did you get the reproduction then? Had Bacon taken the picture of the painting before?
Yep. We took the painting to what? You know, I'm trying to remember. Reno Printing. No, it was Reno Printing, I think. What they did was simply take a photograph of it and did whatever they had to do the prints. That's beyond me. All I do is the original work. But I love that building.
It's a wonderful
and
picture.
I am so glad that it survived. It was beginning to be iffy because, after all, it was built in 18.
Was in the early 1860s.
It was very early. Anyway, the present owners of that have had it retrofitted with iron rods inside that go up inside so that it won't. But they kept it, thank goodness. I hope it's still there because they have built a new building behind it, up the hill.
And I want to show this wonderful painting.
That's
Pyramid Lake. Is Pyramid Lake.
Oh.
And did you use the colors that you were talking about?
No, this is actually watercolor.
This is
professional watercolor. That was before I did these.
Ah.
Before I did those. Yes, it's an older piece. I don't know where my signature is. I think it slipped inside the mat.
It probably slipped. So what were kinds of inspirations that gave you ideas to paint? I know you painted a lot of landscapes. How did you decide?
I did a lot of Nevada because my husband did not want to, when he retired, he did not want to travel afar. He liked to go around Nevada. This is what he made for me, and this, and this. And I have quite a few things of turquoise, our our state
Stone.
turquoise, and I'm a December person, so turquoise is my birthstone.
Okay.
And he did it.
I want to ask you a little bit about, I think we finished your inspiration. So I want you to continue and talk a little bit about what inspired you. How did you stop and decide to paint something? What were you looking for? And I think that's what I'm going to ask is,
Well,
wait a minute, let me just ask this. Okay, go ahead.
As most artists do nowadays, I would see something and I had a good camera, I would take a picture. That was to solidify in my mind what the place was like, and I could do sketches in color in my sketchbook, and then I would go home and make paintings, you know.
What motivates you? What's obviously now you have slowed down a bit, but
I got old.
But in your younger days, what motivated you to be active in the community and in the art world?
It's just what I always wanted to do. I don't remember not wanting to do it.
So what have you learned from your life experiences of 93 years?
What have I learned? You know, I wish I'd thought about it. People are wonderful.
Do you have any, did you have any successes that you were extremely proud about?
Yes, I guess so.
What was your most favorite art project?
My most favorite what?
Art, your picture. What was it? If you were to pick a favorite subject for art, what would it be?
Okay, I have a painting still in my home of Baker Creek. Bob and I actually hiked it's an 8-mile hike in the only national park in Nevada. It's Great Basin National Park. It's on the corner of, here's Utah, here's Nevada. You know where the park is. We hiked the 7-mile up to Baker Lake because he knew that the Fish and Game Department had flown over with an airplane and planted trout in that lake. You can't get to it any other way. But he was with them, and he pushed out the trout, and they landed in. He wanted to find out if they survived. So we hiked up there, and he went fishing. And I was tired after 8 miles up. And I rested on a big rock for a while, and I watched him fishing, and then I walked over and he went, shh, I've almost got my limit. He had 8 baby fish that had survived, and it was fine. That trip up that creek, I had taken photographs on my way up because it was down below, there was trees, and there was rocks and this wonderful creek coming down. But after we got farther, of course, we ran out of vegetation and everything. However, I had the photographs, and that painting that I love in my wall is a photograph of my memory of Baker Creek. So that's a good one.
Well, that's a wonderful one. I'd like to show the photograph of you in your studio. Is
Yeah, it's in my studio.
In your younger days.
When?
In
Well,
your-
I was a member of the co-op at that time, so it probably was in the 60s. That was when I had hair. It got cut off. What a shame.
Did you experience any failures in your art? Did you learn from mistakes?
The only thing in my life that has really been a tragedy was when my son died unexpectedly. That I didn't accept it at the time, and I still have a hard time believing it. He would be about 73 now, but about 5 or 6 years ago, I got the call from Susanville. He'd been up at Lake Elmanor. There was an accidental drowning. I just refused to believe it, but I had to accept the fact that he's not there. My daughter is still living and beautiful and very helpful. She checks in with me at least once a week and see if I need any groceries for my apartment, and she gets them. And if I need to go to a doctor appointment, which is rare, she takes me. She's a good buddy.
I don't believe that you gave us your children's names.
Pardon?
I don't believe you gave us your children's names. What
Oh,
were they?
well, there's Robert Norton Hilts Jr., who was born in 1944, and Deirdre, Deirdre. It's an old Celtic name. I'm not Celtic, but I love the name. Deirdre Lynn Hilts, married first to Ron Ford. They had 2 children. There was a divorce, and now she's married to Jim Caspers, has been for 25 years. She's a beautiful girl. You should meet her.
So, in your life of 93 years, how would you like to be remembered?
I hope a lot of people have my work and that makes them happy. I hope for that. What else? I just hope that I do love people. I hope they know it. I don't know how I should be remembered. I lived a long life. I watched Reno grow from a little bitty town in the 1920s. Where I live now on Plumas, Moana Lane comes down that way. That was the absolute end. I used to walk when I was in high school because I loved to walk. I'd get as far as Moana Lane, and that was the end of Reno. I knew a lot of people. Would you like to know who
No,
I knew as...
just wondered how you would like to be remembered. So obviously your art is a way that
My art speaks for me. That's all I know.
I think that's a wonderful, wonderful legacy. Do you have any advice for a young woman starting out from your vantage point of a young
Well,
gal in her 20s?
Believe in yourself, my dear. Don't let anybody put you down because you're not a male. Ever. No matter what you do to earn a living, you always have time off. Paint, draw, whatever you want to do. I know that you can't make a living. I had a husband who had a job. I wasn't going to go hungry.
Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your passion and your time with us today, Ruth.
I hope I gave you something. It's been fun.